here to discuss the impact this attack and subsequent siege will have on France, as well as its effect on the relationship between the West and Muslim community. I'm joined now by Zainab Chowdhury, chair of the Maryland office for the Council on American Islamic Relations, and Jamal Tajani, journalist, Middle East analyst. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming on. Zainab, let's start with you. How do you think the attack and hostage crisis will impact France's Muslim community as a whole?
That's a very good question. It's something that's on all of our minds right now. First of all, thank you for inviting me on the show, and let me begin by saying that my organization, the Council on American Islamic Relations, strongly condemns the attack on Charlie Hebdo, and our hearts go out to the victims and to their families and to all people of France. It absolutely makes no sense to us whatsoever. That's definitely something that's on our minds right now. How is this going to impact long-term relations between Muslims in France and non-Muslims, their non-Muslim neighbors? Unfortunately, there has been a lot of Islamophobia, especially in recent history, that's swept across Europe, and not just in France, but in Germany and Sweden and other countries. And we were concerned about how this is going to play out. We're afraid that it's going to lead to more Islamophobia. It's going to lead to more hate crimes against Muslims, and just make the lives for Muslims that reside in that country a lot more difficult.
Jamal, what do you think the motive was behind the attacks based on the little that we do know?
Well, I think it is a little bit too early to understand the motive, but now we're finding out that there was a relationship with travel to Yemen and Al-Qaeda in Yemen. I think the real motive is really to polarize the French and European public against the Muslims, because in what we've seen, and as my colleague has mentioned, with the rise of Islamophobia, this is a prime moment, the beginning of the year, after we've been witnessing marches and demonstrations in Germany and other countries against immigrants and Muslims. I think the timing of this and the involvement of Al-Qaeda is really to polarize the Europeans against the Muslims in Europe.
Jamal makes a good point, and so do you, is that there is this wave of Islamophobia going on. We just saw huge marches in Berlin, as you just mentioned. Of course, the hijab is, or the full headscarf is banned in France. How was that dynamic before these attacks even happened? How was the dynamic between the Muslim community and just the populace there?
It was tense. I mean, I'm sure that it was very difficult for Muslims in France. As you know, Muslims, women who wear the headscarf cannot attend public university. The freedom of speech, the dichotomy that exists here in the United States is very different from how it's applied in France. Women who wear a headscarf are not allowed to work in the public sector for the government, for example. So a lot of women, they work from home or they find other means of sources of income. And so the concern is now that there have been attacks on mosques after the attack yesterday. The concern is that now Muslims are going to struggle to rebound, they're going to be forced to deal with the backlash from this horrific incident.
Unfortunately, there's already multiple mosques that have been targeted. Jamal, what is your response to this common argument? And I get it all the time. I can't imagine how many times you guys get it. Every time something happens, it seems like 1.6 billion people in the world are scapegoated, that something's inherently, fundamentally wrong with Islam that drives this ideology. What's your response?
I think you're absolutely correct. There is now, incrimination by association. Every time you have a terrorist attack and the terrorists happen to be Muslims, or in many cases, if you ask, Muslims who understand the teachings of Islam, they'll say they are not Muslims, but I'm not going to go there. But, you have 1.6 billion Muslims around the world. And every time, Muslims are asked to come up with an apology or an excuse, I think it is time to start the discussion and to talk about the things that people don't want to discuss, which is, issues in Europe around Islamophobia. Not that this is that gives a green light for these heinous crimes, and the so-called war on terror that started since 9/11. I mean, these things do not happen in vacuum. A few years ago, you know, the Muslim community or the minorities and the immigrant community in France, they were like all other minorities demonstrating in the banlieue area because of the economy and unemployment and so forth, issues that we're seeing nowadays in places like Greece. And so it's very easy to recruit through those youth and people who are desperate, and to take them into countries like Yemen and train them and you know, make terrorists out of them. I mean, you have to go to the different causes, be it the racism that happens in the country, but also France is part and parcel of the attacks on Muslims around the world. I mean, people don't talk about how many Muslims France kills, be it in Mali or its involvement nowadays in Syria or Libya and so on. These things don't happen in a vacuum.
They definitely don't. Zainab, let's talk about the cartoons portraying the Prophet Muhammad. I know that there's various views on whether or not depicting the Prophet is offensive within the Muslim community. Break down that complex issue.
It's very interesting because a lot of people now think that, you know, this is actually an issue of free speech, and a lot of people are concerned that Islam now does not allow free speech. And it's very false, because Islam actually, there are clear verses in the Quran that specify that there is no compulsion in religion. My organization, the Council on American Islamic Relations, we're a civil rights organization, and we strongly push the concept of free speech, the freedom of speech. People are entitled to their opinion. They're entitled to feel the way that they want to. There is no justification for this kind of heinous attack. We live in a society where people have all kinds of opinions. We're not going to agree with everybody's opinion. But at the same time, it's important to also be sensitive to other people's religious beliefs, to you know, religious figures that they hold in high esteem. So the issue of free speech is interesting, because this magazine, Charlie Hebdo, they actually, there's a, not that this justifies the attack, but there is a double standard that exists. A few years ago, they recently fired a cartoonist who had drawn a cartoon that was deemed to be anti-Semitic. So there was no tolerance for anti-Semitic cartoons, but yet they were promoting cartoons that mocked and ridiculed one of the holiest figures in Islam. So there is that clear, you know, disparity in how people of different faiths were being treated in France. But the bottom line is that everybody is entitled to their opinion. And in Islam, clearly, it states that there is no compulsion in religion. So there are groups that have their own agendas, their own political agendas, and it's very important to differentiate between religion and politics. I think that, especially with some reports indicated that one of the brothers, he was motivated by human rights abuses at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. And so it really makes us wonder what role that played in the attack.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing up all those excellent points from both of you guys. Jamal Dajani, Zainab Chowdhury, really appreciate you guys coming on.
Thank you.